Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boils and ghouls, and welcome to another exciting edition of the Horror Tour Guide podcast. I'm your horror host, Slaughter Cin, she-wolf, empress of gore, and today we're sitting with Vincent Carbone, but I'll let him do some more of the introduction. Please tell us where you're from and what do you do?
You can call me Vinny. And I am originally from Long Island. I live here in New York City. I am the public programming and events manager at the Morris Jamel Mansion, which is the oldest house in the borough of Manhattan. But my passion and what I also do here is I'm a paranormal investigator.
Ooh, so exciting, Vinny. How did you end up at Jamel Mansion?
So how I came to be here was for of all things, a bachelor party. I've been investigating the paranormal since about 2011. So when my friend who I investigate with was getting married, we said, hey, let's go on an investigation in the city. Went on to Google, found this place, never heard of it, came here. I got to talking to the then executive director. She found out that my academic background was in theater. I was commissioned to write a play. And then while working on that play, I got offered a job as a programming manager because that kind of ties into what I was doing in college anyway. It's a dream job. I get to direct plays here and lead paranormal investigations. So people think that when someone dies, they turn into this angry, vengeful spirit. That's not the case. If you were cool in life, you'd probably be cool in death. If you got some unfinished business, you might have to take care of that, but that's basically it. So
I had seen an inscription by the stained glass windows adjacent to the balcony that you mentioned. Can you give me a little bit of information on that? Because it didn't read out too well. It was something about May and there was a date.
So we actually have three. There's the very cursive one, then there's one above it that's very crude and scratched in. It looks to be, I think it says 1908. I got to double check that.
1888, I think.
That's the one. It's the one underneath that says 1882. Mm-hmm. Then the one above I think it says 1908 or something like that. And then there's one downstairs on the left side of the door, if you're looking at the door from inside. I don't know who did that. Again, that could be something that someone was joking around. I could go, down in the men's room, there's a concrete wall and it's scratched in. It says Tom Edison. Obviously, he didn't do that, but someone could have been messing around, but I don't know who scratched that in. I don't know when that happened or who did it.
Can you tell me some of the ghost stories that are paired with this house?
Well, every ghost story is an urban legend, right? I could tell you something fantastical happened, but there's no way of you proving that one way or the other if you were there. We weren't sitting around at an events planning meeting and saying, how do we get more people in the house? Oh, I know. We'll say we're haunted and we'll charge people to come in for an investigation. That conversation did happen, but it was because there's been centuries of reports. The ghost stories actually go back to at least 1810 when Eliza moves in, and she claims to hear knocking and banging and voices and all that stuff. Now, what I always say, and this is what any good investigator will do, is they look at both sides of the story. At that time, spiritualism and the fascination with the afterlife were really coming into play in the American social life. So this is stuff that started over in Europe. You had guys like Arthur Conan Doyle and all these other philosophers and magicians and actors and playwrights would kind of get together and talk about this stuff. And so that was called the Spiritualism Movement. That comes over to the States right around the time Eliza's becoming an adult. So what happens is you get these people who are having these fancy dinner parties, and then they would get together and they would say, hey, let's have a seance, or let's do what other wacky thing they would do to get a cheap thrill at that time. It was also a thing to say, hey, my house is haunted, casually mention that at a dinner party. Now, I always say, why do you think someone would say, oh, my house is haunted? Why do you think someone would say that?
Possibly from personal experiences based on, I in fact had a story where my house was haunted.
Right.
And based on the things that I experienced, it was everything from lucid dreams, felt like an outer body experience at some point. Something was revealed that was later, in fact, revealed in real life.
Wow.
So the connection was kind of ironic or eerie at the same time. And there were a lot of reported stories and things that I had witnessed and heard. Footsteps, things on my bed where I actually felt pressure. And so it was my experience was based on personal experience. Things breaking. You don't see anything when you go to the area where the sounds are coming from, and people behaving strangely based on the activity that was present in the house or whatever was in my house at the time.
Right. So that's all true. That's all, you know, I mean, that's your personal experience. So I'm cool with skeptics. I think they're great. I think in life in general, we need to surround ourselves with people who disagree with us, because that's the only way we're going to grow as people, as individuals, and also to fortify your own beliefs. You know, it's not good to just surround yourself with like-minded people. You know, you got to surround yourself with some, you know, engage people that are going to disagree with you. So I actively try to do that in investigating as well. I don't try to be argumentative. People will come to investigations or whatever the case is, and they'll be like, ghosts don't exist. Okay, great. Well, that's your opinion. You haven't had an experience, you know. But with that said, is that I hate when people, you could tell them a whole list of evidence and they'll be like, ooh, ghosts. It's like, great, that's a very immature, sophomoric response to a very valid statement that I just made. Anyway, with all that said, when Eliza moves to the house in 1810 and all that, she's a part of that group, or she's desperately trying to be a part of that group. You know, she's very nouveau riche. So her husband was French and she came up as a poor actor. They would go to these New York parties, but no one would talk to them, kind of deal. Anyway, so I think part of the reason why Eliza would have said her house was haunted is because it's kind of like saying my house is so cool and so mysterious or whatever that people want to be there after they're dead, right? Mm-hmm. When I came here for the first time, as I said, and I got commissioned to write that play, when I first came here to start writing or just getting ideas, the archivist came up to me and said, here, you might want this, and she gave me stacks of letters that were kept in archives. And when I opened it up, it was newspaper clippings and handwritten letters that people had written to the house going all the way back to the 60s, wanting to learn more about the ghosts. And at that time, up until within the last, I'd say, 5 to 10 years or so, they never talked about it. They never talked about the ghosts. They just wanted to focus on the history of the house. They thought the ghost stuff was silly. Our ghost stories go all the way back to at least Eliza's time and continue to this day. We have things happening. Matter of fact, if you want it, later on I could play for you an EVP, electrical voice phenomena, that we captured during a private investigation back in October. Still to this day, probably the creepiest EVP that I've ever, of an investigation I've ever been on.
Now, was this at the house?
This
at this
was
house?
here in Aaron Burr's room, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah. Just remind me, I'll play that for you. But some people have claimed to see things and all that. I haven't. I've heard voices. I've heard footsteps.
What's the feelings that you get behind being by yourself, per se, and just having to deal with listening or getting the sensation or feeling of something other than yourself present?
Well, I mean, it's never a pleasant feeling, despite how many times I've done investigations here or elsewhere. It's never fun. When something like that happens, there's the initial, like, pit in the stomach kind of feeling. And then after that, it's did that really just happen? Probably the scariest thing that's ever happened while I was here by myself was I had just locked the gate to the park. I was in the house completely by myself. 45 minutes later, the doorbell rings. So I jump up thinking that someone got locked in the park. And we sweep the park before we leave, or before we lock the gate. So I was like, because it's a big property, someone could be hiding or whatever, whether they meant to or not. So what happened was I jumped up, I ran over to the door, I opened it, and there was no one there. And I would have heard someone running, I would have heard someone, hiding or something like that. So I had to call the cops to do a sweep and, try to explain that to them. The short answer is that it's never a thing of like, ooh, I'm so glad that happened. It's not that. My interest in the topic is what keeps me in. It's not like an adrenaline thing for me.
Well, that was my question. It's kind of like a half-answered question. So why do you do it?
Well, some people get into this stuff for resolution. They want to disprove the existence of ghosts. They want to prove the existence of ghosts. They want to know that there's more to life than this. Some people get into it. It's like the same reason they go on roller coasters or go to scary movies, is that that sense of adrenaline and accomplishment. For me, it's just because I love history, and as a person who works in theater, I love stories. So whether it's the story of the person that lived there, the ghost story, or the story that I can tell when I leave. And honestly, I think underneath it all, I was very in the closet about this stuff, when I got into it. I never really talked about it on Facebook or anything like that. And then throughout the years, things have come out, whether it be an article, something like that, and so people find out. It's whatever. I don't care now. Shockingly, more people will come up to me and say, I got to tell you this story, than I thought they would have. Like when I went to my high school reunion, people were saying, you know, hey, I heard that thing that you were on, or that show that you did, or whatever. Let me tell you about this experience. I was like, oh, okay, so y'all don't think I'm crazy, you know, kind of thing. So for me, it's that sense of intrigue. It's really that simple. It's nothing. I had an experience in college. I had always been into ghost stories. I always found them fascinating. And then I had this experience where I was working in a dorm room late one night. It was a very small lobby. The faucet in the men's room turned on by itself. And then the same thing happened to another night desk attendant a couple weeks later. And we found out that a male RA had hanged himself in the stairwell right behind where I was sitting. So that's kind of this moment where I was like, well, okay, well, I need to check this out. I think at the end of the day, the same reason why people love movies, they love television, they love music and theater, is because they love a story. And that is one of the most basic human needs there is in this very complicated, technologically filled world that we've created. People love a good story, and they love a good thrill, you know, because that's not a feeling that we feel all the time. Thank God, you know, because then we'd have heart problems. But yeah, so I think that's it for me.
Do you feel that these encounters or personal experiences fuel your inspiration to write?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's like nailing Jello to the wall. I mean, you get a little bit of evidence, but you know, for every little EVP or every little thing that happens on an investigation, there's hours and hours and hours of things not happening. I've always joked that the day I see a full-bodied apparition is the day I can retire from ghost hunting, because then I've achieved everything I need to do and, you know, improve. But of course, that wouldn't be the end of it. It's just going to make you go into it more. Now I'm hooked on because I also love to travel, so the traveling aspect of it. You know, last week I was in Kentucky. 2 weeks before that I was in Rhode Island investigating. So it's something to do while doing something else. I'm going to be traveling, but I also get to travel. While I'm traveling, I get to do this.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your paranormal investigating? I'm curious about the other locations that you have traveled to. You can start with the last one that you have, and how long have you done it since you started? Which one was your first, which one was your last, and which ones were your most memorable?
My first investigation was at a historic house up in Rochester, New York, which is where I went to college. It's called Valentine Museum. I think that's what I'm just trying to remember what the title of the house is now. Valentine Museum. And it's a big old house. I don't remember the year it was built. I'm going to say at least the 1800s. And people were living in it up until pretty recent times at that point. So that was my first investigation. And, you know, talk about fear and stuff like that. I was jacked up. Like, I was really, really terrified. And what's funny is that we have people that come into our investigations here not really knowing what to expect. And they'll be really scared and really nervous. And then I say, don't worry, because I always start with a lecture. And I always say, don't worry, that's going to go away in 10 minutes. I promise you. Sure enough, it does. Because they find out quickly that that's what they see in TV and movies and stuff like that. That's where that belongs. What we do is very, very different. So it's not about scaring people at all. And that's what happened to me on my first investigation. I was so scared. I thought something crazy was going to happen. By the end of the night, I was like, oh, I could sleep in this place, no problem, you know. So that was my first one. I've investigated a few residences, private residences. One that my friend grew up in, his grandmother grew up in on Long Island. Another one on Long Island this past spring. Gettysburg, Salem, Kentucky, Rhode Island.
What was in Kentucky and what was in Rhode Island?
Rhode Island, we investigated at a place called the Slaughter Mill, and it's now a museum. Like, all these places are museums. But it was just a big industrial area where a lot of children worked, and it was a big textile plant as well, but they had a giant water mill in there. And then they've also moved other historic landmarked houses onto the property. That was about 3 weeks ago now. Last week, I went back to Louisville, Kentucky to investigate Waverly Hills Sanatorium. I investigated there last year. I mean, when you go to a location where over 60,000 people died, it's hard to not be influenced by that, positively or negatively. So, yeah, so that was the most recent one. I have one tonight here at the mansion with another private group. Oh, also in Louisville, I investigated another museum called Portland Museum. And then this grotto, it was attached to St. Joseph's Infirmary, which was, the grotto itself was built, I believe, in the 1920s. The hospital has since been knocked down, and now it's like buildings for the University of Louisville, but the grotto is still there, and it's a garden. And so we had some pretty wacky activity there. But I mean, like I said, I've been very, very fortunate to be able to take this hobby on the road and investigate other places, like I said, like in Gettysburg and Salem and stuff like that.
Funded yourself, or is it privately funded? Do you have sponsors?
No, not paid. It's like any other hobby at this point. It's just kind of
Passion project.
Yeah, basically. Not until you start talking about like TV deals and stuff like that do you get paid to do it.
Can you tell me, out of all the places that you visited, any one of those that you could say you actually was the scariest place or the most activity that you've ever experienced in your career as a paranormal investigator? Is there one that sticks out amongst the rest?
Well, the scariest was the first one. If I was to go there today, it'd be totally fine. It's just that I guess the scariest I've ever been on an investigation was that one, just because I've never done it. The most activity, probably here at the mansion. And I say that only because it's a thing of probability and percentage. I've investigated here. I've lost count. I've been here 3 years. We do maybe 12 a year, so do the math. I've lost count how many times I've investigated here, so that means just percentage-wise, I've exposed myself to more chances of activity. So does that answer your question? Kind of, yeah. So but overall, I think the most intense location I've ever been was Waverly Hills. I mean, that's just like I said. I mean, that was a sanatorium. You had a person dying an hour at its worst, and then it became a nursing home. A whole lot of other wacky activity that was going on there after it closed. So the most steeped in possibility for something to happen would be there.
What were your findings, if any?
At Waverly Hills?
Yes.
So last year we captured a lot of EVPs, especially when we were in the morgue area.
Can you explain EVP?
Yep. EVP stands for Electrical Voice Phenomena. And that's something, back in the day, it would have been like these big reel-to-reel, jobs, whatever. But now you could do it on your phone, honestly. A lot of people still like to use digital recorders. So it's when you pick up a voice on a digital recording that you didn't hear in real time. That's different from what we call disembodied voice, which is something that you hear while you're there in real time. A lot of investigating, people don't realize, actually happens after you've left the location, because you got to go back and watch all the footage and listen to all the recordings and then see what you find. Typically, it could sound anything like just a whisper of one word, or it could be a full sentence. There's some incredible examples online of quality EVPs. We had one, which I could show you right now if you'd like, happen here in Aaron Burr's room. So it ranges.
What's on your to-do list? What's next? What would you like to visit next? Or is there one particular place that you're dying? No pun.
When people have asked me that, the Lincoln bedroom in the White House, but that's not going to happen unless I become president, and we'll see what happens. Eastern State Penitentiary, Allegheny, Lunatic Asylum. I really like to investigate homes, people's houses, because that's a totally different feel. It goes from, oh, this is just a hobby, to now we're actively trying to help someone try to get a resolution and find some answers to what's happening. Yeah, so Eastern State, Allegheny, that's about it. I mean,
Alcatraz, maybe?
Alcatraz would be a great one. And prisons, hospitals are, unfortunately, they're great conductors of activity. I am just as excited to go investigate that grotto in Louisville as I am to go investigate somewhere else, like Waverly Hills, just because it's another opportunity to go out and see what's out there and see what kind of evidence I get. That's all.
So, Vinny, what are your future plans or goals in terms of like your paranormal investigation, or where do you see yourself in a few years from now?
See, I don't know. I always joke about that. I don't know how long I'm going to want to do this. I don't see me wanting to stop to do it unless something traumatic happens on an investigation. I think the goal is to just continue to stay at it and build my name up as someone who's credible in the industry. Maybe write a book. There has been some chatter about different TV opportunities, so we'll see where that goes. But I think if nothing else, just continue to build up myself as an investigator, work with credible teams, build up Gotham Paranormal as an organization, continue to do lectures and things like that. I've had the great experience of being able to do that a few times already. And I think overall, help dispel all of the negative garbage around paranormal investigating, whether it be people, the public's opinion of what we do, because people think that we're psychics or that we're devil worshippers or anything. No, we're not. So I think A is to try to better myself as an investigator, but also B is to clear the name of what paranormal investigating is.
What kind of advice do you have for someone that is interested in doing this same thing or taking this similar path?
Don't believe what you see on TV. Understand that what you see there is for entertainment. And, I'm not completely bashing what they do. They keep, for better or worse, they keep the business relevant. They keep people interested. But know that it's entertainment, it's TV. So if you're looking to get into it, don't try to emulate what you see there. Try to hook up with a credible group. Check them out online beforehand. There's a lot of groups out there that are into this for the very, very wrong reasons, either to try to get famous, to try to, as bizarre as it might sound, try to hook up with other people, in a sexual manner. I've heard crazy stories.
Really?
Absolutely. That's yeah. The paranormal field is it's a subculture that when you get into it, it's kind of like, whoa, there's a lot going on here that's got nothing to do with ghost hunting at all. Yes. If you think about it, it could be like any other topic. Young person comes into it with an interest. They somehow, one way or another, meet an older person, man or woman, who, is kind of, I don't want to compare them to like a Charles Manson kind of situation, but it could happen very easily in any topic. And, in a bowling league, it could be someone in a very vulnerable state could be taken advantage by someone in what they perceive to be of an authority figure. It could happen. So just be aware of that, steer clear of that. Don't do anything illegal, as silly and as simple and as basic as that may sound. A lot of people think ghost hunting is breaking into a hospital or a graveyard and doing that. That's the exact opposite of what you should do. So if you're going to do it, go about it the most legal way possible. Get some good equipment. You don't need to spend a ton of money. A basic K2 meter or EMF detector, a digital recorder, a flashlight, a REM pod. It's going to run you a couple $100 after you add it up. Me personally, I don't really go for these like ghost apps. I'm not a big fan of the Ovilus. It's just I know how a K2 meter works. It measures electricity. I know how a digital recorder works. It picks up sound. I know how a REM pod works. That measures static electricity. When you start to rely on tools that are made specifically for ghost hunting, that gets a little wonky for me, because unless I'm missing something, there's not a ghost in a lab somewhere that they build this thing, they test it, like, okay, great, and then let's sell it on Amazon. Be sensible. Everything can be summed up in just be sensible.
What is your favorite horror movie?
Well, I got a list. It's a perfect 7. The Others, The Visit, Insidious 3, The Conjuring, The Sixth Sense, and Hereditary, which just came out in June.
I have mixed feelings on Hereditary.
Everyone does.
To each his own, of course.
Yeah. I have a weird connection to the Trauma franchise. My cousin did makeup for them. I don't know when, but at some point I heard that he did that. And I think he also worked at Jekyll and Hyde's as well, so that makes sense to me. So when I first moved to New York, my first job was I was bussing tables and I was delivering food for this restaurant in Hell's Kitchen. And the guy who hired me, his name was Anthony Ventola. He was like, I went in for an interview, I just showed up and I dropped off my resume. Then I called the next day and I said, hey, I was just wondering, I was just following up. He goes, you know what, we're not really looking for someone, but I'll give you a job. So I was like, okay, great. He was the manager during the daytime. It came out, there was a rumor that he was in a film back in the 80s called Nukem High. So everyone always talked about it, but don't bring it up to Anthony because he's very embarrassed about it. So of course I watched it with my friends and it was hilarious. He was in it and he found out that we watched it and he got really pissed about it, but it is what it is. So then a couple of weeks ago, was working a corporate event, and I found out that one of the guys there not only went to the same college that I did for theater, Brockport, up in Rochester, but he too was in Newcomb High, and then he was also in another one for trauma as well. I forget. His name was Gary Schneider. But so it's weird how these things kind of come full circle. Yeah.
They do. They do. He just actually toured, if I'm not mistaken. He had the tour of Return of Newcomb High.
Yeah.
Actually, I think I promoted one of them when he was in California in Burbank.
Right.
That's
pretty funny. I mean, you know,
I love him.
You know what you're getting into when you're watching one of those.
Yes.
It's so, and he knows it too. So, and that's fine. I think it's great. We need it.
If there was a horror character that you can identify with, who would it be?
A horror character that I could identify with? Well, I mean, I feel for them, right? Like, I feel like I just directed Dracula this past October here at the mansion. And, you know, I don't blame him. You know, he was just trying to survive. Frankenstein, he didn't ask to come back to life, kind of, or the creature, not Frankenstein, the guy himself. But so I would say probably them, because I often find myself in situations where it's like, I didn't ask for this. You know, I'm just showing up doing my thing. I didn't want to do this. You know what I mean? Probably them. Definitely have sympathy for them. I think that's the point. I think that's what makes great filmmaking. Is you can't break through the initial, oh, they're scary looking and bad. Then you're missing the point completely. Also, the young priest in Exorcist. I've always wanted to play a priest in a film, in a stage production. I don't know why. I'm not Catholic at all. It's just something that I think a role that I think I could really have fun with. I don't know. I'd really have to think about that.
Have you been on any films, any television shows?
TV shows, yes. I was on an episode of Haunted USA, the New York episode. They featured the house, and I was the guy that introduced the house. So if you happen to have caught that at 2 a.m. on Destination America, whatever it was, that you might see me. And then as far as film, I was in a movie years back, and it's called Dark Was the Night. I filmed it in February of, I want to say, like 2011, I think. Never heard anything again. And so then years later, it was on Netflix. So I got to see it like 4 or 5 years after I filmed it on Netflix. So I don't know if it's still on there, but it's one of these, I don't want to call it a B movie, but it's one of these more independent films. Caliber Media is the one who released it. It's a pretty good film. They filmed it out in Southampton on Long Island, where I live. So it's funny because a lot of people I did theater with out there is in it. Also, it's supposed to be in Maryland, but it's a fictitious town in Maryland. It's not, so I can't help but watch it without being distracted. Like, oh, I did that there when I was a kid, and that's this place, and that's not a police station at all. It's whatever. So yeah. So Dark Was the Night. I play a hunter, and let's just say I get killed. Hey, my name is Vinny Carbone. I'm a New York City-based paranormal investigator, and you are listening to the Horror Tour Guide podcast.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Vinny.
Do you want to hear an EVP?
Yes, I do, and I was actually going to record it as well, if possible. Hell out of here! Hell out of here! So we're about to sign out right now on the Horror Tour Guides podcast. Make sure to join us next time as I slowly devour this tasty morsel.
It's time to die, Vinny. Time to go.
No.